So band level groups survived through hunting, gathering, foraging, scavenging, fishing, right? Um, and a lot of people are under the impression that they did a lot of hunting. Hunting was a minor part of the group's weekly activities. In fact, it was probably somewhere around 20% of the weekly activities around gathering food. Um, Sally Slocum, a physical anthropologist, went back and studied these groups of people and looked at who was bringing in the protein and the nutrition. And what they found was that women, through most of their gathering, foraging, and even sometimes hunting, were bringing back from about 60 to 80% of the caloric intake of the group, and men were bringing about 20 to 40%. Um, so again, when mostly male anthropologists and other groups were analyzing these individual culture groups, they were focused on men, the hunting, as being the most important and bringing back the most protein. And this was actually proved wrong by Slocum's research. Um, so again, the interesting part is that this hierarchy, status-driven people, which we are all part of, or that ethnocentric bias, viewed other groups as having this same kind of mentality. What we did was we put our ideas of gender division and uh, power importance of job on the males who were hunting, and in reality, it was a minor portion of the weekly activities. Also, from early kind of missionary contact, we find that women were hunting and men were gathering. The Octa of the Philippines, there's a tribal group where women do most of the hunting. The Aka of Africa, there's a tribal group there that men do uh, almost an equal amount of nurturing as the women. Um, Obviously, the nursing the young is going to be on the side of the women, so they edge out men barely with the nurturing factor. We have these universal descriptions of people and how we've always divided gender, and they're just absolutely incorrect because there are always outliers. Because culture, every single group that has ever existed on the planet, in one way or another, is an educated experiment. And what I mean by that is they're going to take things from the old cultures that they came from and change them up, just like our founding fathers did with our country. Again, this is a giant experiment to see if this is the right way to organize people, or functional way anyway, in terms of getting away from the binaries. Um, Foraging, super sustainable when you do not have a lot of people on the planet. It is extensive, not intensive. And when I say extensive, it means a large area of land is necessary. If you take California, for instance, if you have acorns, oaks scattered around the hillside, um, it's going to be, you're going to have to kind of go through a lot of oak trees, but you're also going to do a lot of traveling and hiking, which left you in good shape. Um, uh, the other thing is that what we need to know is hunting wasn't always the way to go. Scavenging also existed. Again, think of you get. I don't care if it's the savannas in Africa or whatnot, but early man probably followed the big predators around and waited for them to kill off zebras or other large mammals. Um, and then we would, as a group, scare off the predators and then take the meat from them. This is a less intensive, right? It doesn't take as much energy way of getting protein and meat. We kind of look at this as, wait, what? But remember, early groups of people learned how to use nature. They were natural geniuses in this way. At least that's what we would call them, because they knew every plant and every little thing, every bug, everything that would help them in health, cure diseases, um, the easiest way to survive. This is what people figured out at a very kind of early stage of human beings. Um, they're definitely the band and early tribal levels for foraging. Again, not much division of labor. Everybody did everything. And again, no private property. We're going to go into more detail of what that meant. Use rights. Groups have ultimately had socially recognized priority or access to specific resources. So what I mean by that is we usually call these core culture areas. So you'd have your little village, right, and a circle around the village. Now, usually other neighboring groups wouldn't come into that core, but outside of that would be the hunting area, the fishing area, maybe even your water. That's the peripheral uh, culture area. And many groups mixed inside that periphery, and this created trade agreements. This created exchange for basically mates, so that you did exogamy, which is breeding with other groups outside of your group. Endogamy, which is internal breeding, causes some genetic problems. Early humans figured that out as well. So foraging was very sustainable. Um, fishing may have separated us from our early ancestors as well. But the earth basically provided for people when we were at a smaller population number. In fact, the earth still could provide for a large number of people. We just don't utilize the natural foodstuffs that are available to us. So tribes is a bigger number. We're moving up to 300 to 5,000 individuals. Um, Again, tribal level peoples are mostly egalitarian, but sometimes they were led by headmen or headwomen. And what I mean by that is individuals that would temporarily assume a leadership role. Let's say that there was a conflict and groups were basically trying to resolve that conflict. It could be again infringing on somebody's kind of use rights. And again, these people used public property, but there was still kind of semi-norm, at least cultural normal boundaries to certain things. It could also have been in response to maybe a serious conflict where there was some a skirmish or something happened, and we'll talk about symbolic ritual war in a second. But these individuals would assume temporary leadership, and then they would give that leadership role back when that conflict was resolved. And again, these conflicts could also have revolved around moving or planting when we start to get into horticulture. Um, if a group of 5,000 people was all sitting around and arguing and maybe taking a vote, they may assume that the person of kind of prestige would assume a leadership role in that situation and kind of make a final decision in terms of, hey, we need to move upriver so that we actually can survive as a group. And these groups were connected through kinship and clan structure. So again, how people are related to each other, bloodline usually, but not always. But definitely what you called your relatives. We start to see a shift from hunting and gathering to a horticulture and pastoralism, and we'll talk about those in a second. So tribal level groups are definitely the in between in terms of what's the next growth level. And what we should think about with the tribes is it's just a bunch of different bands put together, right? So if I have a clan or a band, right, and another clan and a band, but we're in the same basically tribal region area. We speak the same language. We probably even have the same beliefs in terms of religious ideas. But again, they're just a couple bands or a few bands put together in a larger group. And again, this happens very fluidly. We think, whoa, how did we just jump to this next stage? Well, it's pretty simple, right? A couple band level groups, which you may even be related to, right? If let's say that we're part of a band and a couple of us decide, you know what, we're not really kind of getting along, so we're going to move upriver and start kind of our own group, and they do that. Ultimately, it could be that there's something that brings us back together as a larger group. It could be famine. It could be just negotiating out food. It could be that we decide that working together actually makes more sense. These things kind of happen, right? And they happen in our society. So this happened in the tribal level as well. Symbolic and ritual war, and this tends to happen in places with tribal or band level groups. And what I mean by this is one of the issues that I have with the word civilized and saying that people were not civil. Morgan calling individuals savages at this level, they actually operated in a more civil way in my mind. And what I mean by that is that many groups in the Ohlone will read about. They would use ritual or symbolic war. And what it meant was, let's say that there was a conflict, and the way to resolve that conflict was a symbolic war. Many groups in Africa, they line up their drummers and they have a drum off. And then a temporary headman or headwoman on both sides would negotiate out a peace treaty. This happened in various ranges. The Ohlone basically line up, and then one of their best hunters steps out, and then one tribe shoots at the hunter that has stepped out, and the other tribe shoots at the other hunter that has stepped out, so that you are only shooting arrows at one individual from the tribe. It is not total war. It is ritual war. Once one of those individuals that has stepped out, that is kind of symbolically representing the group, is injured, if they take an arrow to the leg, the war stops, and the temporary headmen that have been chosen, or even the chiefs, temporary chiefs, ultimately would negotiate out this trade agreement, or this new kind of hey, we're going to get along thing. So this is ritual or symbolic war. It's very fascinating. Groups at the band and tribal level did this around the world for a very long time, and people say, well, this can't be real. Well, this is very real, and this is what people did do. And the reason is that human beings tend to cooperate in these settings. And what I mean is before civilization and competition and hierarchy and inequality, human beings tended to get along. And that's not a universal, but that's how we basically got to where we are today. Killing off your neighbor doesn't actually make sense for you. One, you need the DNA. You need to be able to breed with different groups, otherwise you're going to have internal issues in terms of mutation and whatnot. Two, cooperating and working with your neighbor that maybe they have more acorns and you have more fish works better, because then you don't have to work as much as a group. Cooperation is key, and human beings tend to actually have this in us, and it may separate us from our other primate relatives, and even our early ancestors like Homo erectus and Neanderthal. There is recent studies on human infants and bonobos, and what they found is that human children definitely see cooperation and helping as part of early infant. Right when we can see, humans have this empathy or try to figure out and have in them who to trust and who not to trust. And really, the bonobos that the study looked at were picking the kind of more dominant figure in this little experiment, rather than the one that was helping. So this cooperation gene seems to be in human beings. Now, can culture overwrite this cooperating gene? Absolutely, 100%, and we have for a very long time. And this is why when I get into classes, I have to explain that we actually started out by getting along with each other. Again, archaeological evidence of war and violence is sparse from about 30,000 years ago all the way up to 11,000 years ago. And before that, there wasn't much evidence of it either. And just look at recent discoveries in terms of Neanderthal DNA inside of us, 1 to 2%, maybe even up to 4%. We weren't just killing everybody, and people just weren't in total conflict. We ended up getting along. So it's tough because world history, and I was a product of this process as well, they don't teach this stuff. They act like early native groups just basically hunted and killed each other off. And a lot of times, again, we have, early, even your book mentions tribal groups taking different groups as slaves. Well, this is at a chiefdom level, and it's very different. We have a hierarchy of status. So that may be true, but it also may have been a misinterpretation by the early groups watching this. This may have just been an exchange in how they exchanged DNA to different groups, and we couldn't explain it, right? It seemed to look more like slavery or taking people hostage or whatnot. So again, it's tough to say, because these early people that were analyzing this structure were not anthropologists, and were not living with these people to ask these questions. They were just kind of making judgments. So it's kind of tough to look back on. But definitely know that at the band and tribal level, human beings for, again, 290,000 years have been getting along and got along. For the most part, right? And they did not have this violent thing inside of us. So when individuals are telling me, but Griffin, we've always had competition, and we've always been in conflict, and we've always injured one another. No, this is a societal production. Society, at least in modern state level systems and even chiefdoms, creates an inequality system with this power vacuum. and we'll discuss it a lot. I'm sure it's going to come up in discussion posts. But yeah, ritual war is one of those things that is fascinating of these ancient groups.